Russia celebrates Victory Day on the 9th of May each year. It's a celebration of the country's victory over the Nazis during World War II. It's normally a day for Vladimir Putin to flex his military capabilities and firepower, but this year looked a little bit different. More than 2 years into the war in Ukraine, Russia only had one tank on display. It was then accompanied by some mobile rocket launchers. But previous years have seen entire divisions of tanks and many more armoured vehicles. Nevertheless, Vladimir Putin used his Victory Day speech, aimed as much at a foreign audience as a domestic one, to try and warn Russia's combat forces were always ready, but he did admit the country was going through a difficult period. Now, the day is an integral part of Russia's identity, and on the 79th anniversary, thousands of servicemen paraded through Moscow's Red Square. They served as a reminder of the role that the Soviet Union, along with their allies, played in the Second World War. The Soviet Union lost about 27 million people in the war. Almost every family was affected. Times columnist and Russia expert Edward Lucas explained why this day is still so significant for Russians.
Most important sort of secular event in the Russian calendar. It's the really big day because it was the really big day in Soviet history. It's the day when they celebrated the defeat of Nazi Germany, which was really the sort of more important, I think, for the Soviet Union than even the Russian Revolution. It's the rather like the Battle of Britain and D-Day for us. It's the time they look back on with real pride. And it's coming, as you say, at a very difficult time. And there were a couple of things I noticed. One was that there were some troops from the Central African Republic there. And that's one of the few things that's really going well for Putin, is his advance into Africa, rolling up what had been French or American allies or client states there and installing regimes with the help of Russian mercenaries who are giving Russia a footprint in Africa that it hasn't had since the days of the Cold War.
On top of this, Putin now uses this anniversary as a justification for his move on Ukraine. In his speech, he hailed the Russian troops fighting in Ukraine for their courage and blasted the West, accusing it of fueling regional conflicts.
Russia will do everything to prevent a global conflict, but at the same time, we will not allow anyone to threaten us. Our strategic forces are always in combat readiness.
Putin has just begun his fifth term as president, at a time where tensions between the West and Russia are at their highest level since the Cold War. Why? Well, it's down to the war in Ukraine. Since first coming into power at the end of 1999, Putin has made the 9th of May an important part of his political agenda. He's frequently spoken about his personal ties to World War II and the part his father played in fighting the Nazis on the front line. For several years, Putin carried a photo of his father to the parade. And he's incorporated some of this narrative into his justification for the war in Ukraine. When he first sent his troops into the country on February the 24th, 2022, some of this justification came by falsely describing the Ukrainian government as neo-Nazis. Russia now currently controls about 18% of Ukraine, including Crimea and parts of 4 regions in eastern Ukraine. Russia claims that these regions, which were once part of the Russian Empire, are now again part of Russia. However, what way will the war go? Many think it's not looking favourable for Russia.
I think there's still a good chance that Russia loses and Ukraine wins, despite the very difficult conditions on the land battlefield in the northeast. In the end, the West, European Union, Britain and America and the other allies are much bigger and stronger than Russia. Russia's got an economy about the size of Italy, and although they're willing to devote a great deal more of their economy to fighting this war than we do, we are a great deal bigger. You know, the West is $20 trillion GDP, and Russia's, I think, about 1.6 last time I looked. And so I think that if the West gets its act together, things look pretty bleak for Putin. But we're not there yet. The Americans have voted the money for the much needed supplies of ammunition and air defences and long range precision strikes. These are having an effect. The Russians are suffering serious problems with their fuel supply because the Ukrainians have been hitting oil refineries. Logistics is always the weak point in the Russian military set up, and they're putting increasing pressure on Crimea, and of course also the Russian Black Sea Fleet, which used to own the Black Sea, basically, is now hiding in one corner of it because it's afraid of being sunk by Ukrainian drones. So I think this is a long war. And I think if we get through this year in a kind of stalemate, there's a chance of Ukraine doing quite well next year. But there's also a chance that Russia makes a breakthrough and takes a lot of Ukrainian territory. The position on the front line is really difficult.
But 2 years on, tensions only seem to be rising between Russia and the West. Just recently, the US President Joe Biden signed off a $61 billion aid package to Ukraine. The UK also said that Ukraine had the right to strike Russia with British weapons. And as forces dwindle, the French President Emmanuel Macron has so far refused to rule out sending French troops to fight Russian forces. And how has Russia responded? Well, of course, it has seen these as a threat and has recently announced it would practice the deployment of tactical nuclear weapons as part of military exercise. So it might not come as a surprise that a nuclear missile launcher was on display during the parade, another reminder of Russia's nuclear might. However, Putin said Russia would do everything it could to avoid a global confrontation, but it would not allow anyone to threaten it. Leaders from countries like Belarus, Cuba and Kazakhstan came to watch the 79th anniversary parade, but there were no leaders from the West. A contrast to how this may have looked 79 years ago, where once allies are now viewed as enemies.